Good evening, everybody. My name is Balie. I'm Artistic Director of International Film Festival Rotterdam. And I'm usually as happy as a clown, kid in a candy store, especially in this period, because we get to screen so many fantastic films from all corners of the world. More than 500 films, from 4-minute shorts to 14-hour epics and everything in between. From China, from Brazil, from Thailand, even from the Netherlands. And that's all great fun. And then you realize at a certain point that your prime minister is shaking hands with what might be considered a neo-fascist populist from Brazil, and you think there is a problem in the air. And if you talk to the filmmakers, it turns out there are even bigger problems. And if you talk to the former director of the festival, who's now running it turns out that 25 years ago already, they had an initiative called Film Free to try and create a freer space for people, filmmakers, that made films that their governments did not approve of and acted upon with little steps, like a little bit of censorship, pulling a little bit of funding, usually ending in incarceration or sometimes even death. And you realize filmmaking is a tough job. I knew that slightly because I've made some films myself and they were also kind of dangerous. And you always, at a later stage, realize if something has worked out, that there's been many, many people involved in getting it where it's supposed to be. At a festival, for instance, to an audience, for instance. Not just the cast and crew, but a whole bunch of people behind the scenes often, especially for the most interesting ones, that made sure that, first of all, everybody survived, that the filmmakers are there to present their film, and that it was made. Especially if it's critical, because that's what cinema can and should do. So all those films that we're showing, many of which are critical about what's happening in the world or asking questions about it, what it means to act upon it, none of those films are made easily, and it turns out that there's many filmmakers at risk. Maybe an open door, but we really need to do something about that. We don't really know yet how. There are many organizations that are very invested in trying to help in various stages, and we've hosted a couple of debates in collaboration also with IFFR, for instance, this one with the Balie, to figure out whether we can map out those lines that connect the support mechanisms or the solidarity mechanisms for the films we want to enjoy, for the films that make us question the status quo, and in particular for the filmmakers at risk. So we were in touch with the European Film Academy, Marion Deuring, and we asked her, you guys were so instrumental in the lobby to get Oleg Sentsov, remember him, to get him into the media. Would you know someone who would be able and willing to give a freedom lecture on this particular topic? And the person that sprung to mind immediately is our honorary guest of today. She will give the freedom lecture. She is Oscar-nominated Polish director Agnieszka Holland.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Freedom lecture, what it is. Well, my name is Holland. I am from Poland. I live in France, US, Poland. I study in Czechoslovakia. I did the movies in US, Poland, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Germany, France, I said already, UK. That is my identity. So I prepared for you some words which are reflecting somehow my point of view, which is connected to my experience and my identity, and to me as a filmmaker as well, because I'm not a politician, even if sometimes I'm taking stands. I am not a philosopher, so very notion of freedom, it's to me something very practical, not theoretical, and I hope that it will be the good beginning for the discussion, because I hope that we can speak about about where the cinema is today, and where the world is today, and what we can do about it. I will be reading because it will be easier if I will find the beginning. When I decided that one day I will become a film director, and I was 15 at that time, film seemed to be living up to Lenin's famous definition as the most important of the arts. It was the mid-60s, and European and Asian art house cinema was at its peak. The artistic movement handed its rank such incredible personalities as Bergman, Bresson, René, Fellini, Antonioni, Rossellini, Pasolini, Reed, Wajda, Kurosawa, Ozu, and many, many more. They were all bound by a single shared experience. All of them, as grown, mature people, lived through the horrible atrocity of the World War II, even if for some of them the experience was not that immediate. During that time, humanity showed its most horrendous face, and the Holocaust, the death camps, seemed to mark the absolute heart of darkness, and end of the line after which poetry is impossible. The experience of this generation, of the generation of my parents, was a radical one. Many of them would also experience the war on their own. They lived with the constant feeling of danger, fear, suffering. They often had to make impossible moral choices. For all of them, the war had been an existential shock, which determined their perception of reality, their values, and their moral hierarchy. Now, this most certainly does not mean that all of them, or that even the majority of them, would explicitly tackle the subject of war in their films. Nevertheless, it is clear to me that the experience of war provided them with a more profound, strident perspective and a certain personal gravitas. The feeling of responsibility for what kind of stories they tell and what formal choices they make, the awareness that the world is infinitely complicated, the people are capable of absolutely everything, even of the most atrocious acts, and that our sense of security is extremely fragile. The experience of war required new stories and a new language. Most of all, it gave to young filmmakers the power to speak with their own unique voices. Their artistic sensitivity was nourished both by the reality around them and by introspection. They did not want to, nor they had to, hide behind conventions or traditional forms of expression. They knew that the audience, who shared their fears and doubts, would follow them even on a dark and bumpy road. Those were beautiful years for cinema, which seemed to be growing up, widening the scope of its formal means of expression. The next generation, that of people born shortly before the war or during the war, not only opened itself to new issues of modernity related to culture, society, or politics, but most of all, they introduced in the language of a kind of anarchist boldness, which in various countries led to the revolution of 1968, student movement, the hippie culture, freedom initiatives in countries behind the Iron Curtain. There was a real wave of new waves. The Czech one, the French one, the British one. Cinema started to use artistic styles which earlier had been present in poetry or visual arts, which at times led to a cinema drifting towards everyday life, to a veristic realism, other times making the reality highly subjective or poeticized, introducing in the stylistic elements of surrealism, collage, or abstraction, playing with space, trying to grasp the essence of a contemporary change. The war had ended 30 years before, the world was divided, and the new generation wanted to radically break away from the stiff, conservative, older generation. At least they perceived it like that. Godard's revolutionary approach seemed like the most accomplished manifestation of this new language. The cinema of the two generations that I talked about was coming to life in the period when I was starting to think about films from a different perspective than that of a spectator. But if I wanted to find my place in the world of cinema, I had to somehow artistically address the cinema of my predecessors. I had to draw my own map of human and artistic identity and fight for the personal map to find and maintain its place on a larger map of the Polish and world cinema. In Poland, my home country, a new group of filmmakers which concentrated around two of our older colleagues, Wajda and Zanussi, was founded in the 1970s. Life under real communism in Poland was threatening, but at the same time seemed somehow familiar. Since the mid-50s, the system had become less unmerciful and had ceased to be the cruel machinery led by Stalin. The people in power were cynical officials who mostly just cared about their own comfort. As it turned out, we learned to skillfully go around the system, widening our freedom zone. We learned to trick the censors because we knew that we remained in a kind of beautiful synergy with our audience, who learned to read our messages between the lines and who proved to be extremely bright, which sadly is not the case nowadays. When it came to the cryptic metaphors, allegories, symbols, pars pro toto, and other elaborate stylistic figures. We wanted to tell stories about the contemporary world and voice our collective anger. In the summer of 1980, this anger met with the anger of workers from the Gdańsk shipyard, whose strike led to the creation of the Solidarity movement. It was then that we, Polish filmmakers, felt an incredible sense of agency, which scared me, to be honest. That the sort of unanimity, this kind of servitude toward the expectations of a social group, not smell of conformism? Is this not the path then that leads straight to the spreading propaganda? The role of art is not to answer the society's current needs. It is to provoke discussions, to broaden horizons, to anticipate threats that had not yet come to life, but that pulsate somewhere deep below the surface of reality. Back then, we would still think that so much was in the hands of cinema. In the 70s and 80s, American filmmakers such as Coppola, Scorsese, Hal Ashby, and many more would make gritty, socially engaged films, which at the same time were attractive to a wider audience. In Europe, there was a lot of high-quality mainstream movies, but ones that had been created with a bold vision by incredibly creative personalities. In those films, complex and challenging issues were presented in the communicative way, which was attractive to a wide audience. While shooting my first movies, I was certainly feeling that my place would be close to this mainstream. Also, I would admire with a tad of jealousy the dreamlike, oniric subjectivism of Tarkovsky, of the formal experimenting of others, and later the radical brutality of Haneke. In the 90s, the world started to become more even. The Iron Curtain was gone. The Berlin Wall fell. Polish communists felt that they were helpless and decided to sit by the round table together with workers and dissidents, accidentally giving them all the power. The Soviet Union had fallen, burying, as we then thought, once for all, the temptations of totalitarian ideas and the illusion of a bright future of global communism, the idea of an imposed universal happiness. Those ideas were so extremely compromised because of the enormity of the atrocities committed under the banner of real communism, so extremely false in true Orwellian style, that no one would have thought that they might one day be reborn. A return of fascist-like ideology seemed even more absurd. The vaccine of sort made of the Holocaust, the creation and development of the European Union were meant to guarantee a permanent immunity for this awful temptation. There seemed to be no other option than capitalism, liberal democracy, and free market. Some historians proclaimed the end of history. Meanwhile, under the seemingly rational surface of reality, new challenges and fears were rising. The Soviet Union was terrible to its citizens and to the citizens of the satellite states, but its very existence added humanity to Western capitalism. When the Soviet Union fell, the ghost that would temper the unmerciful egoism of capitalism disappeared with it. The rich started to get rich faster, the poor were getting poorer, many people fell into the trap of mortgage. Consumption and new technologies became our favorite form of entertainment, a doorway to escape from the real world. Cinema became as boring as life in this axiological vacuum of neoliberalism. The majority of filmmakers did not have a significant human or historical experience to discuss. They were very apt, sometimes even innovative craftsmen or artists, but they lacked substance. The center, the mainstream cinema, started to shrink, and the cinema, much like music, divided itself into two opposing camps: sophisticated, ambitious, and challenging art house cinema, and popular, artistically lukewarm entertainment, dominated by unambitious comedies or Hollywood superhero flicks, overflowing with the special effects, family-friendly animation, or romantic comedies. The producers focused on genres that are communicative everywhere and always attractive, but lack any specific cultural identity. The void left by high-quality mainstream cinema was filled partly with ambitiously convinced TV series. Nature abhors a vacuum. People are always hungry for gripping stories and fascinating characters. Currently, the TV series have become the most dynamic branch of audiovisual fiction storytelling. It is also the most popular one. It is benefiting from the revolutionary changes in the way of distributing audiovisual content, cable, internet, VOD, and so on. There are more and more television series, and they have started to conventionalize themselves after the first wave of innovative approach. Nowadays, only very few of them tackle the true challenges of our contemporary times, either topically or philosophically. I have started to feel more and more that the role of audiovisual narrative is to provide an escape from reality, the escape from freedom. Art and entertainment, much like politics, started to become an escape from freedom. Being free means being responsible, and who would have wanted to feel responsible for our contemporary world? What kind of duties this responsibility would mean for the filmmakers? Are they equipped to face the challenges of the real dangers and questions? Are they ready to leave our comfort zone? I felt somehow different from my peers in the West, but even more different from younger generation of filmmakers, maybe because I have experienced history on a larger scale. I was born shortly after the war in a communist Poland. I grew up in the ruins of Warsaw. I wore the stigma of the trauma experienced by my Jewish father, a communist who in the beginning of war escaped to Soviet Russia and fought there, unaware of the fact that he lost his whole family in the Shoah. He never spoke about it. He believed in communism, in the future beaming with freedom, equality, and universal happiness for humanity. Instead, what he got was injustice, false accusations, corruption of the initial ideology, suffering and death for those who tried to fight for freedom, and for those who never even knew what real freedom was. He came to realize that he was co-responsible for this terrible lie. When my father lost faith in the ideas that were the very purpose of his youth, he once again tried to start everything anew. Sadly, he failed. In the age of 41, he was arrested by the Communist Security Service officers, and after being harassed during the hearing, he committed suicide. I was 13 years old then, at that time, and since then on, my father's last name, which in his honor I kept even after getting married, became a stigma in the communist Poland. When I was in a film school, I experienced an outburst of hope and a carnival of freedom, as Milan Kundera called it, during the Prague Spring. I have seen Soviet tanks on the streets of Prague in August of '68, the resistance of the society, which ended in the self-immolation of Jan Palach, followed by the spread of collective conformism and resignation after being defeated by the brutal force. The social process of adaptation to the lie called normalization. All of this was the topic of the miniseries Burning Bush, which I would shot for HBO 45 years later. It is a film that I'm particularly proud of because it really managed to show in an evocative way the mechanism of cowardice and of courage in front of the seemingly benign, but in reality terribly suffocating total oppression. After the events of Prague Spring, I was put in prison and was accused in a political trial. Then I experienced the revolution of solidarity movement in Poland, the martial law, which smothered the second revolution I experienced in my youth. After that, I became a political immigrant, and by now I can say that I have lived and have successfully worked in many countries. All the layers of the 20th century's history, the wars, the totalitarian regimes, the suffering, the hopes, the fights between good and evil, were very rarely the forces of good prevailed, and even if they did, the cost was usually huge. All these elements organized themselves in my mind in a single very long process. The Great War was not finished. Therefore, it manifested itself in a new form, the Second World War and the Holocaust. The atrocities of Stalinism and the milder incarnation of the regime after Stalin's death, gulags and breaking millions of people, racism, colonialism, and its irremovable consequences. Last but not least, an inevitable element of this process was always humanity, rising after every fall with a new energy and with a hope that carried in it the anticipation of the next fall. I made 3 films with stories from the Holocaust. All of them were told from the perspective of regular people caught in the machination of history and desperately trying to trick it. I also wrote several screenplays about this time. In all, I spent over 7 years with the Second World War on a very intimate level, longer than the actual war has lasted. In my opinion, the war never actually ended. It went dormant, it hid below the surface, and it can awake any time in a new but equally absurd and violent form. This is why I considered it my duty to evoke the war in my films. The present not only has its roots in the past, it coexists with it every day, here, now, all the time. All it takes is for people to go overwhelmed with fear, which generates hatred. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly at all, our times have started to be penetrated by fear. Various dangerous factors of the contemporary world, to which no one expects for populism to have a cure, have started to spread themselves. The drastic changes in our climate, a crisis of faith in the ideas of the liberal democracy and the human rights, a huge wave of globalization, migration, the concept of the cultural gender and the social and demographic changes it entails, an enormous internet revolution which changed everything, starting with the circulation and verification of information to the way we communicate and create relationships. we have found ourselves in a new dangerous place, both as the human race and as a planet. During the upcoming decade, anything can happen, even the worst scenario. Sometimes it feels like we found ourselves on the Titanic. However, from the filmmaker's point of view, the situation has its perks. It puts new challenges on our way. The troubled contemporary world forces us to step out of our comfort zone and to look at reality and at ourselves from a fresh perspective. The recent triumph of grotesque populism in the United States, in Brazil, in the Philippines, and of slightly less grotesque ones in Poland, Turkey, or Hungary, has shown us that reality is stranger than fiction, and that dystopias are presented in a Handmaid's Tale, or in alternative version of politics like presented in House of Cards, are starting to look like reality shows. As the young Polish writer Łukasz Engelking writes, the starting point from thinking about the triumph of populism in the recent years could be Michael Wolff's definition of Donald Trump as a real-life fictional character. Whomever he may be, this fictional character managed to win the support of very real people, making the world out of joint, as the Hamlet of the liberal bubble would put it. What is more, during this process, the number of Trump supporters did not decrease at all. Masses in wealthier countries are looking for reassurance that this global crisis will not threaten their sense of security, nor interfere with their everyday life. They want to preserve their apparent autonomy, subjectivity. They are waiting for someone who would officially allow them to close themselves in egoistic bubbles and go on with their lives as if nothing had happened. Populists are the ones promising this to people, but their remedy is far worse than the disease. It does not solve any real problem, but creates new ones that are far more dangerous. It destroys all rules and values, which seem to have been a vaccine against various forms of fascism, a tribal nationalism, and egoism. It destroys solidarity, equality, and fraternity. In the end, it destroys freedom. So we, filmmakers, are standing in front of the question whether it is possible for us to have real impact on our world and how we go about making it happen. Since the characters we create have inhabited our reality, then maybe we should introduce reality to our films and put the world back on track by creating a new kind of characters. Responsibility today means putting our imagination to work. That's it.
So thank you so much, Agnieszka Holland, for sharing so many inspiring and provocative questions with us. My name is Dana Linsen. I'm a film critic from the Netherlands, and I have the pleasure and the honor to start off this talk with expanding a little bit on everything you just said, and then we'll definitely be opening up the discussion and have plenty of time for questions from the audience. But before I start, I would really like to thank the Balie and IFFR, but also the vfonds and the Democracy and Media Foundation for making this lecture possible, and also the audience for being here. If you want to tweet your thoughts
I joined
after
the thanks.
Well, excellent. And if you want to tweet your thoughts after the lecture and share them with others who couldn't be present here today, I think the hashtags Freedom Lecture and Balie and IFFR were just on the screen. While we're talking, there's also going to be some slides from some of the films that Agnieszka directed. I'm going to mention some more. You already mentioned the two series you were directing, Burning Bush, the HBO series, and 1983, the series that's currently screening on Netflix. Of course, you're also famous for the film Europa Europa. Last year at the Berlinale, you won a Silver Bear for Spoor, a film that's still waiting distribution in the Netherlands, but it's been bought for distribution. So we're hoping that it will come soon, because it's definitely a film that's getting more and more urgent every day. So somehow maybe filmmakers can be ahead of their time, and then eventually the film and the time will sort of go parallel. I want to pick up with some of the things you were saying just now in your talk, which I've found amazing to see how a personal history and a history of the world and also the history of cinema inform one another and create this knitting work of incidents. Maybe because you talked a little bit about how after the Second World War, you were referring to Adorno's famous dictum that poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric or impossible. How that informed you, where you were also talking about Zanussi and Wajda, the famous Polish filmmakers, how that idea that maybe imagination or poetry or expression would be barbaric or impossible, how did it inform your filmmaking, and how did your first films came about from that thought?
Well, you know, when I was doing and thinking my first films, I was believing in the beauty and in the strength of the cinema. I mean, the cinema, the images, the stories, this mix of, you know, of incredibly rich web of inspirations have been for me more important than the reality. Somehow I was disgusted by the reality. I found that it's vulgar to be interested in reality, and if so, just to use it as a fabric for the creation. And actually, somehow I was right, because in this moment the cinema played such an important role in creating the reality and influencing the reality that it was exciting to be part of that. And slowly I was seeing that the reality and the cinema started to go apart, and that the reality became somehow boring, and the cinema became boring as well. So they are connected. I think that the exciting reality is provoking exciting movies. Of course, you have always the geniuses who don't need any kind of these inspirations. They are so rich and so unique and so talented that they are finding the inspiration in every single manifestation of the everyday life, or their feelings or whatever. But most of us needs to feel that. That is something important, some kind of the, you know, of the epical dimension of the, as Hegel was calling it, the totality of whole, which we are part of, and to fight with that, yeah, and to, you know, provoke it, and to love it sometimes. Maybe, I don't know, it never happened, but you know, it theoretically is possible to live in some kind of the paradise. What I realized, that the personal experience is helpful for the filmmakers. It means the personal experience is giving this the substance of richness and polyphony of the reality. I think that the cinema, it is expression of very different point of views, that the cinema exists not only in the monologues, but in the dialogues in the first place. And ideal it is if the creator, if the artist or the filmmaker is rich enough that he can dialogue with himself as well.
You were young when you just said you were a teenager, 15 years old, when you decided you wanted to become a filmmaker, and then later on in the lecture you also talked about the tragic death of your father, which must have happened shortly before that. were these two incidents in any way related?
Probably, you know, but I don't want to analyze me in the, you know, psychoanalytic way, or to like tell you the story from my life. I use these elements as a part of the of my historical background and on my capital of experiences, and private, human, and also political and historical, which I think gave me the perspective, which is slightly different from the people who have more united and quiet life. But it doesn't mean that their experience is not valuable. I just, when I'm, you know, watching the movies of last decade or so, and I'm watching because I'm working with Marion in the European Film Academy, every year we are watching bunch of best European movies when making the selection. Always you have several, they are good mostly, you know, and everything we are putting on our platform is certainly artistically successful. But in the same time, more and more often I have the impression that the fictional cinema is disconnected from the reality, the deeper movements in the reality, and that somehow, you know, one year after other we have similar kind of movies. It's a bit like Beaujolais Nouveau est arrivé. Except that Beaujolais is very bad wine and our movies are pretty good. But still, I think that we are lacking this courage to grasp, to grab the reality and to struggle with that, to, you know, to find something more in that, to, you know, to go underneath, to provoke really and to surprise, and to take enormous risks, also personal risks.
Yeah, so can we find an inspiration, because you talked about the auteur cinema that emerged after the Second World War and the Holocaust in Europe, of these filmmakers that had this shared experience and also felt this shared responsibility to talk and invent another cinema language. And you talked about the late 60s when all these European new waves came, and you talked about the 70s. Can we learn something from these periods in time where people were trying to reinvent cinema?
Well, they've been able to do it also because they had the audience which followed, you know. And if the audience is sleeping, it's like, you know, it's like democratic societies right now. Freedom is like evaporating, and they are not fighting for freedom. They are just passively hoping that it will pass. And if they are fighting it pretty hysterical and pretty, you know, immature way. They don't know exactly what they want. They just don't like what they have. So it is difficult. I don't know if this kind of the cinema could exist or was able to exist during these years of some kind of the consumption quiet, you know, things. But now, when we are shaken when we have some kind of the tsunami, you know, possible tsunami, I think that the people will wake up, and certainly the filmmakers, if they want to be on the wave and not under the wave, they have to wake up sooner.
So probably there's already an undercurrent going on, and then it's always difficult to predict what kind of choices filmmakers are already exploring and making. But in your own filmmaking, how did these filmmakers, the masters of before, how did they inspire you? Was it in a direct way, in an indirect way? Could you tell a little bit about that?
Some of them on many levels, some of them by some particular film or some particular stylistic approach, but most of them by the boldness and depth of their message. It means, I remember when I was in the high school, and already I knew that I wanted to be, I would like to be a filmmaker, film director. I was watching a lot of films, and it was surprising how many films it was possible to see in a pretty close communist country like Poland, because we had the cine clubs and we had the ambassades, which are like making the showing of the movies, and I've seen probably more than 10 films by week. And by the end of the year, I found my notebook from probably 66 or 65 recently, and by the end of the year, I put the list of my favorite movies, and it was 250 my favorite movies.
In 66, which is the year that I was born. Can you remember which, or you found your notebook? Can
I don't remember, but it was, practically everything. It was a lot of Czech films, because it was just Czech New Wave started, so it was at least 10 of them, like Tilova and Forman, and
communist country, but you also mentioned...
but also some Americans, even if I found that Americans are more boring than. French for sure, New Wave.
You mentioned Godard.
Godard, Truffaut, Chabrol. Agnès Varda was the most important to me, and I think still now that she was the most creative among new French New Wave, and she is only one who.
She's still around.
Yes.
She's still.
Bresson was my big master. Bergman, but many movies which are forgotten today, but which been like inspiring. But it was really 250. If I find 2 or 3 today by year, I feel quite lucky. But maybe it's because I'm older and blasé, and lazy and so on. But I think frankly that the cinema is less exciting right now. But not only cinema. I think that. The thinkers, the authorities, it has something to do with the new technologies for sure. But I think in the first place it has something to do with some kind of the sleep, deep sleep, big sleep
that we're in as a society right now. Because when you look at your work, or you analyze it also more on a philosophical level, I think, and especially the films you already mentioned that deal with the heritage of the Holocaust, there are not easy films. You describe kind of this anger and how maybe after the Second World War and the Holocaust, that became like a vaccine to keep us either immune against that happening again, but maybe it was also kind of a drug to keep us alert and angry. You talked about that as well.
I didn't feel anger so much, I felt some kind of hope and some kind of the responsibility. Anger I feel now. Anger is a bit blind. Anger is something good, but it can be terrible as well, after I did Spoor, which I hope will be released in Holland one day.
Now that we're mentioning it all the time, I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, I was talking about the anger, because it is the movie about anger, about contemporary anger, very, very strongly, I think. And I thought that the anger can be like the fire, it can lit, but it can and warm, but it can also burn everything.
And destruct. So in a way, there is a continuation between those films, as I was saying, on a philosophical level, where you're always dealing with moral issues, and somehow it doesn't seem so easy for your characters, but also for the audience to make easy conclusions out of the films and learn a lesson.
Well, easy conclusion you find in the news. Or in the journalistic work, or in the politician's statement, the cinema, if it tries to be at least partly the art, it cannot give the easy conclusion. The world is complicated, complex and complicated, and but we have to face it. And if what happened now, when we can see, I don't know what is the situation in Holland, politically speaking, except that they are hugging with
Bolsonaro,
yeah. And the Polish president, also in Davos, just said that he feels ideologically very close to this man, and also hug with him. So we have this, this a club of motherfuckers, and if they've been alienated, it will be fine. You know, they can play in their little, you know, little golf. But they succeeded with one thing, to divide the societies, and most of the societies are divided in half. And it makes everything for everybody very simple. We have now pretty, in my opinion, and my bubble, it means half of the population, less or more, a pretty terrible government with a terrible ideology and even more terrible behavior. But they find, you know, a lot of funds. They half of my compatriots are supporting them, and another half hate them, and one half hates other half. So we have some kind of the competition of hatred, which unfortunately ended last week ago in the assassination by some very angry, you know, con. Very wonderful figure of the municipal politics, the mayor of Gdańsk. In very spectacular way, he was killed like on the movie or the theater stage. But the research have been made, and it appeared that those who are in the opposition, it means my bubble, are more hateful against this bubble of power than the bubble of power of this bubble of the opposition even. And we've been living in the of course, like any kind of the bubble, in the illusion that we are better, more noble, more loving, and so. And suddenly we see, you know, the scientific, you know, datas, and it appears that the contrary is true. It means this hatred is like the virus, you know. And the people who are in the camp of liberal democracy, human rights, and tolerance, and, you know, and so on, are not immune to this virus at all.
Now, you're a filmmaker and an artist, but you're also a political, very aware person. Can I ask you the question when this vaccine stopped working? And what artists can do about it, because that also leads to the questions you ask at
probably,
the end of the lecture. Probably
around 2008 with the big crisis, economical crisis. I think that it means it was growing some place. The belief in the future, and also the belief, the respect for some kind of the authorities started to be shaken. The people started to feel that the democracy is not working because their local governments are less powerful than the global corporations. But the crisis was something which took like the share from behind the people, and this change started then. It took 2-3 years, maybe 4 years, before it became apparent. But I think that the process, this big process of change, and this evaporation of the vaccine started then.
And now we have to talk about the function of art in a political way, because if filmmakers were dealing with moral questions after the Second World War and they were sort of reinventing them, what can be the function of art nowadays?
I don't want you to feel that I'm telling that everybody has to do the political movies about the history. I think that we have just to go deep, that like some kind of the, like, we cannot, it means we can, of course, but it doesn't make sense to me to tell the stories which can be changed for another story and so on. Everything has to be bold, personal, courageous, and free. And the freedom, for me, is like the key things, but the freedom means also the risk, the responsibility, and the perseverance.
So, for instance, because you also mentioned that you always knew that you would be working in some kind of the mainstream era of cinema, which I find also interesting because that also means that you want to speak to a broad audience.
Yes.
So let's talk, for instance, about
it's what I was inspired, for example, for my mentor and friend, late Andrzej Wajda, because he taught me somehow that the audience is important. It was easier to be in the mainstream in 60s, 70s, 80s even 90s, because the mainstream was in the center, someplace, you know, it wasn't something like alien. It was the part of the really good, maybe the best cinema. And after mainstream moved toward very commercial cinema and very like industrial kind of the cinema, which is conceived by the, you know, in special kind of producers and the distributors and the financiers. It lost this personal courage. It started to be planned, as you know, as any product of sale and consumptions are planned on the free market. And what I thought was mainstream, it became some kind of the wasteland. It was empty, and that it was the moment, I think, when the cinema lost its the real cinema, the cinema which has like real personal message and personal style, started to lose the communication to the audience, you know, some kind of the chain which was keeping us together. And the audience drifted someplace, you know, to different place. Some of them stopped going to the cinema, some went only for the commercial movies, some started to watch on the TV series in different way. Or some, of course, you have always some bunch of people who are going to the music hall to listen modern music, and who are going to the movie theaters to see the art house movies. But they are very, you know, small.
On the other hand, with the television series you directed for HBO, Burning Bush, and now for Netflix, 1983. You're also addressing this audience, you're addressing maybe a mainstream audience in not such a mainstream way. Could you talk a little bit about how you figured out how to put these questions and research into human nature into those series? Maybe we start with 1983 because it's
1983. Yeah, 1983 is some kind of it was the first Polish language, you know, TV series, and it was created by the young American writer living in Poland for a while. So it has this both point of views. Maybe it is a bit too ambitious for Polish viewers because it's pretty complicated. And we like this kind of, you know, dystopic fantasy, but in the same time it is not deeply serious statement, you know, it's some kind of the entertainment in the first place, but exciting for the directors because he needs to create the new world.
Let me briefly interrupt you and just give a super short sum up of the series, because it's kind of a what-if scenario. What if communism didn't fall and Poland would still be living under communism?
But different one that we used to know in the 80s.
So please continue, but at least now the audience know. So you have this what-if scenario. What if Poland still would be communist, and then I assume you.
Well, it is connected to our, you know, to our discussion about or to our subject of the freedom, because the main, you know, the main conflict. It is what is more important, or more what has more value, freedom or security. And what we see now is that the people are changing freedom for security, or the appearance of security at all, because I don't believe that the security is really secure. But because they are afraid, because they fear that they cannot control the reality, they don't understand the reality, they are afraid of the changes which can come, and which came already. They want to be secure, to be close, to be safe. And the freedom is on the way. So we are showing in 1983 the world where the communists didn't fall, that is a pretty totalitarian country, but in the same time, people feel safe and happy. And they don't know, because they are pretty isolated, and in the same time, the economical situation is pretty good. It's a bit like China, for example, or some Arabic states. They are happy. They are not like fighting for freedom. They don't think that freedom is something really important. And only a small group of people, young people, some kind of the terrorist group, is trying to wake up the people and to venge the opposition which was killed, and to show to the population that they are living in the terrible lie, that everything is built on the lie. And that is the ideal, idea of any kind of the contemporary populists, because they need to create some kind of the lie to build this kind of the bubble, this kind of the like in this movie. How was called this movie? When it was the bubble, Peter Weir movie.
Ah, yes, the Truman Show. Thank you, audience.
Truman Show.
We're gonna do the quiz with
Truman's,
you.
Yeah. So they try to do something like that. Yeah, all of them, with the lies like we are the only important, America first, make Poland great again, and so on and so on. And actually, people feel okay. Why not? We are in this bubble, and except that half of the people don't want to be in the bubble. They want to open up and to face the reality of the world. They want to be free. So that is the main conflict. And in the series, in some popular way, this conflict is shown.
And this conflict, in a way, between conformism and rebellion is because you directed some episodes of this series, but that is a theme that sort of is also running through your work.
Right.
Why is that so important for you to return to that every time?
Well, because it's relevant, because it's what we are living. It means it is not something which, of course, you have the periods when you have impression that is dated, that it doesn't matter. When Margaret Atwood was writing *Handmaid's Tale*, the novel, it was like well received, but the people didn't feel that it's extremely relevant. Volker Schlendorf did the film about it a few years later, and the film was practically, the flop. And suddenly, after Trump's election, the series, which is very well made and everything, but if it was made 4 years earlier, it didn't have the success. But suddenly people felt that it's relevant. So after Trump's elections, on the #1 sales on Amazon list was Orwell's 1984. And second was, I think, Philip Roth's what is the title of?
Plot Against America.
Yeah, Plot Against America.
So can we also talk a little bit about what you were referring as how we need to bring reality back into cinema because reality has become fictionalized, if I sum it up correctly right now?
Look at Durante or Trump. They are exactly like the characters from the TV series. Like they are bigger than life. They are fictional. They've been invented by somebody, and then suddenly become the part of the reality. And not only part of the reality, but they are shaping the reality. So we have to, they stole our reality somehow. So, if the fictions, and I was shooting the season 5, it was House of Cards, exactly in the moment of Trump's election. It was absurd, we didn't know what to do. Suddenly the reality was much more bizarre and unbelievable than, all the fiction invented by the screenwriters. And when we started, when I was shooting also on season 3, few episodes, and then it was some kind of the, alternative history, some kind of the little dystopic, popular Shakespearean popular, fiction. And during those 2 years, it became totally opposite. So we have to, you know, they stole our reality, so we have to steal it back. And I don't think that the politicians are capable of that, because they are afraid, they are limited, they are, you know, they don't have the vision. So we have to do it. We filmmakers have to do it.
But you also referenced Lenin, and there were a lot of early film philosophers like Walter Benjamin and Adorno who also already warned of the tendency of cinema and moving images to become the ultimate tool for fascism. So are filmmakers in a way responsible for the fact that reality became more fictionalized? I know this is a tough question.
Well, they are, of course, because they've been lazy, you know, they didn't notice. Of course, the changes is happening in the society. It's not that filmmakers can control everything and decide about the things. But let's dream about it, you know. Let's say that it doesn't make sense to make the cinema if you cannot create the reality which is bigger than the reality. And if we have to also, you know, go after reality, it's boring.
So
it's pointless.
Let me pick your dreams then before I open up the talk with the audience, because it's hard. You were already saying we don't know what's going to be. Maybe there's an undercurrent, but how can cinema reclaim this reality? What are your strategies?
Courage, imagination, freedom, boldness.
And how does it look? How does it work for you when you're writing or imagining a scene? Is there any scene?
I don't know. I don't have like the practical recipe how to do it. You have to open up to that. That is the process, and it has to be like in you, and it has to be also, of course, it is important that you know that you find the allies, that you find the people who will put the money into this and distribute it and so on. So far, for example, when we are talking about series, the most exciting series I worked on from the social point of view or political point of view was The Wire and Tremé, both by David Simon, who is now writing the adaptation of Philip Roth, exactly. It was like 10 years ago, a little more even. And after, when the societies became as divided as I described, America, you know, Poland, and so on, the distributors and the network or cable or VOD executives, they understood that political subjects are not good because they divide also the audience. And the politically engaged filmmakers are dangerous because they can alienate some part of the audience. So now we have very, you know, dangerous and very interesting, actually, times. And we have the people who decides about the, you know, about the audiovisual storytelling and narration, who wants to put you to sleep, to escape the reality and to escape the freedom.
It almost sounds like...
So we have to be, you know, we have to, filmmakers have to unite somehow.
And be inventive.
But in the first place, they want to do it. If not, they will be doing what the safe stuff. You know, in Europe, it's pretty easy to make the film for the filmmaker, even a young filmmaker. You have so many funds, and you have so many things, and you have the co-production treaties, and you have, you know, different kind. You know. So many movies. Of course, everyone is struggling. You know, it's always it's a lot of work, and you know, but actually, so many films are made.
So
and what?
I'm gonna try again, and then I'll invite the audience to share their thoughts with us, because also you were inspired by filmmakers who worked under censorship. But we can also go back a little bit into the early days of cinema, of American cinema, when they were working with the production code, which was also a form of self-censorship. And then filmmakers became really inventive in smuggling little, in that case, mostly sexual messages into their films, and as we've seen under political censorship, especially in Eastern Europe, people were able to smuggle in political messages. And then, so should people become more subversive, and should the audience become more literate in recognizing metaphor again?
I think it will come, you know, because I think that probably it will be difficult again because of the economical censorship or political censorship to speak openly, which actually can be creatively good, except if they will put it into the prison or gulag, like our friend Oleg Sentsov or Kirill Serebrennikov, which we've been talking about today. But if not, if you can work, actually to be more innovative and to not to use a simple message that you tell, you know, you have to think like that and like that, but to play on different levels, that is pretty good. And probably it will happen if it will continue like that. But I think that we are probably in the situation when, in the first place, we filmmakers have to feel that we want to fight for something, that we have something to tell in the first place. That is some kind of the unique message or knowledge or feeling we know and other people don't. So we have to share it with them.
Okay, now the audience can use their creativity and share back. Are there any questions, thoughts? There's 2 microphones, so if you raise your hand, a mic will go your way. I see a question over there, and then please stand up, because everything is also being recorded and live streamed.
Thank you. My name is Seda Grigorian. I'm a documentary filmmaker from Armenia. I have always been focused on the struggle for democracy in Armenia in my films, for human rights and this kind of issues. And in a way, the injustice that was there in the country was motivating, you know, in creation of documentaries. But as you may know, we had the Velvet Revolution last year. So things seem to be getting much better. And it seems that we have reached to the point that the struggle was aiming for. So now I have a bit of a provocative question. First of all, where do you think arts and cinema should stand in such transitional periods where you think that you are there where you were fighting for, and now what do you do with the current reality? And the provocative side of the question is more, don't you think now when we talk about the societies that struggle for like freedom and the societies that have it and are in this sleep, don't you think freedom is dangerous for cinema and arts? Thank you.
If the freedom is dangerous, but freedom is always dangerous, you know. Freedom is a choice, and the choices are difficult. Freedom, it means that nothing is safe, that nothing is sure. And it's always a challenge, the freedom. It's why the people are escaping it. So I remember I was telling about it several times, but it stayed with me when in 1989, when the communists fall in Eastern Europe, and first in Poland, after in Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and so Romania. Mostly in peaceful way. I went to Prague to see in my own eyes, you know, this Velvet Revolution, and to meet with Václav Havel. And I met him closely after with Miloš Forman, who was very skeptical. He said, "Oh, I don't believe that it will work, the freedom." He said, "You know, those people are like animals who used to be born and raised and lived in zoological garden, and suddenly you open the cages and they go to the jungle, and it's scary. Is in the zoological garden, yeah, it's sure they are not free, but they are safe and they are fed well, and they are not exposed to another dangerous species who can eat them. And when they are in the jungle, they can die any moment, you know, and they are always, they have to be all the time aware. They have to be, you know, very, 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 very careful about every step they are doing. And when you are used to the safeness of the zoo, you will not survive in the jungle. So probably We are just not free for freedom in this part of Europe, at least. But it doesn't explain why the other part of the Western world is also looking for cages. That I don't know exactly why. Maybe we contaminated them.
Also, it doesn't explain why you're quoting two people who were actually breaking open the gates and carving out freedom for themselves.
Well, Havel was more optimistic, but Forman was, you know, skeptical Czech Jew. No, he didn't believe that it will work out.
But still, he was looking for freedom.
But still, he shot the flew on the cuckoo's nest.
Exactly. So
well, but you know, we are divided. We know the dangers of freedom, but in the same time, we are dreaming about freedom. We want it. At least I do.
I think we all do. There's another question over there.
Hi, my name is Sydney Levine, and I write a blog, Sydney's Buzz. Poland has always made such great films. I think part of the freedom coming up that we have to cope with is the women, the blacks, the people of color starting to make films. That should offer some originality we haven't seen. But in Poland, I like the lure. I know with the new government, it may not be the lure again, films like that. But I'm just curious, what do you think of Cold War? How would you analyze that, please? Thank you.
Well, I like it. It means it was some controversy. It is the controversy about this film because it's quite radical film in terms of the style and of the temperature and the message. And some people find it cold. Some people find it pretentious or too stylish. And I was deeply moved by the film, and it was for me the great inspiration on the formal level, but also on the level of the content and how the storytelling works in such an economical, elliptic way, which I am of course very jealous of, because you know it has 83 minutes and it tells so much, and all my movies are over 2 hours, and. And you know, and they are only 2 hours 20 because I cut it down, you know, to 2 hours 20. Because if normally I let them be, it will be 3 hours or more. So my personal jealousy for Pavel's craft is something which also lights, you know, my reception of the film. But I think it's very, very good film, very important film. And yeah, we have great filmmakers in Poland. We have now the new wave of women filmmakers. And I think that the new generation of filmmakers in Poland, the most interesting films and people, the persons, creative persons are women.
Can you share names so we can support them? Or look
yeah, but it started with middle generation like Małgorzata Szumowska and Ania Jadowska, Kasia Adamik, Olga Hajdas, who won the prize here in Rotterdam last year. Jagoda Szelc, very good one. Ursula Antoniak, who is also living in
yes.
Holland. Much more, you know. I can actually make you the list.
This is already a beautiful list, so we can go out.
Yeah, Agnieszka Smoczyńska, who did The Lure.
Yeah,
and
we were referring to that film.
And Fugue recently, which was in Cannes. So yeah, they are great, and who also did one of the episodes of, you know, for example, 1983. What was quite special that it was made by 4 women directors. It was myself, Kasia, Olga Hajdas, and Agnieszka Smoczyńska. And if it was longer, we will open it to others.
Will there be another season, as they say in those terms?
No, I don't think so. But anyway, if it would be, certainly we will ask another girls to do it.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we can talk about if there's something like a female gaze, because you just opened a whole other subject.
Yes, but what was your? I'm not sure if I answered your question. Was something else in the question which I didn't answer?
There was a part about black people also making films and
immense.
Yeah, you know, the minorities has always at least one story to tell. So at least one film made by talented black or women or homosexual filmmaker has very important substance. And it proved that what I say, that the life experience is helpful certainly in shaping the cinema. But we don't have the black filmmakers in Poland. We have women. We have some homosexuals as well, which been hiding, but they are not hiding anymore, which I think is a big change. And we have some crazy people as well.
They're always beneficial, but at the same time, of course, in Poland, if there are no other questions, I'll just do a quick follow-up question to this, because at the same time in Poland, we see that under the current political climate, actually, it's also getting harder for minorities.
I think it's good for cinema. I think it's good, you know. I think we've been too lazy. I think it will kick us up. Except if they will silence us.
Yeah, I always think like...
Well, it's possible, yeah.
We should never say these things in public.
20 years in Czechoslovakia, for example. No one good film. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's something that history
challenge.
Has proven.
But I hope that I hope that, you know, like suffocating regime don't have too long life, because after, yeah, it will be bad for at least one generation.
Any other questions at this point? Do you feel a responsibility to support younger filmmakers and voices of minorities, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, I do.
In this series, and are there other ways you work with them, or you scout for people?
Well, I'm not scouting. Like I'm, you know, watching films, reading the scripts, or watching the shorts which are around or which are sent to me, and if I meet the person I think I can be helpful for, I try to help as an artistic advisor, or, you know, somebody who is helping to, you know, to defend them against too afraid distributors or something like that.
Because you've also been talking before about how filmmakers maybe, I'm not going to really use the word unite, but more or less should find each other and engage maybe in conversation about how are the things like that happening in Poland right now?
Yes.
Are filmmakers?
Yes, we've been unable. You know, it was many stages. It's maybe a little too specific, and maybe you are not interested. But it was two peaks of after-war Polish cinema. It was late 50s and 60s, and then it was 70s with the new generation, like Kieślowski, myself, and a few others. And after solidarity movement won for like year and a half, it was a kind of the revolution. After was the martial law, and it was 10 years when the cinema was suppressed. And when the communists fall apart, they've been hoping that it will be now the renaissance, the renewal of Polish cinema, and they believed stupidly in the wiseness of the free market. So they thought, and even Wajda or somebody like, you know, the really smart people, they've been believing that they don't need any state money or any public money, because the audience will follow. But the audience disappeared, you know. On the free market, it's very easy to sell the shit, and the people are, you know, become too lazy to look for something which needs to be chewed. Was more than a decade when Polish cinema was practically dying. And then we created Polish Film Institute, and it was the law about the cinema, which was fought by the liberal parties, which was actually supported by the authoritarian party, which is now at power. And it changed completely everything. On the beginning, in 2005, we've been doing like 5 movies which had 700,000 of viewers, and 10 years later, it was 50 movie with, I don't know, like 20 millions of viewers or something like that, you know. One film only this year, very good, very important film about the Polish clergy, very critical and very, you know, controversial, had close to 6 million viewers. So, you know, it shows how muscular the cinema is.
Any other questions from the audience? There's another one over there.
Sydney Levine again. What was the name of the Polish film you just said that is muscular?
Clergy. Clergy, like about priests. And you know, when the situation started to be again, you know, dangerous, we created the Directors Guild, and practically all important directors are part of that. And we try to help each other and collaborating together. So it somehow, you know, this danger of repression will bring us together. So I have some hopes.
So we've been talking so much about freedom, and I'm not going to ask you for a definition. Maybe I'm just going to ask you to expand on a thought I'm having listening to you. Because on the one hand, absolute free market freedom is not good for freedom of expression, if I listen to you correctly. And then on the other hand, when you have an authoritarian
free market
regime,
can be easily manipulated.
Yeah.
You know? It's like internet is not a freedom. Internet, it is a tool which can serve the freedom of communication or expression, but it can also, and it happens unfortunately, be the tool for the most terrible lie and manipulation and division of people. And you know, so it's like with the knife, you know, it can cut the bread, but it can also kill somebody. So the freedom is in our spirits. It's not in, you know, in the tools we have.
I was hoping you would say that, because listening to you, I feel like freedom is also something that comes from within, but that's also maybe in the middle, and it can expand from there. But I'm really hoping that this talk and these wise words have brought many thoughts and liberated your minds. And I can only thank you so much for being with us and sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Agnieszka, thank you so much.